Whenever I would give a talk about the history of debt, and there were more than 2 or 3 people in the audience who were under the age of 25, people would start coming up to me afterwards and saying, do you think there's a way to start some kind of movement around student debt? And the story was always the same. It was, I played by the rules. I was one of the good kids. I studied hard, I worked hard, I went to college. Now suddenly I'm unemployed because these bankers trash the economy, and the upshot is I owe them $40,000. They got bailed out. I'm going to be told I'm a deadbeat loser for the rest of my life, and I did something wrong. I mean, this is completely wrong.
But students, like anybody else who's taken out a legal loan with a contract, is under an obligation to pay it back.
Yeah.
Well, don't you take that seriously?
I think that AIG took out a lot of contracts. They didn't take them seriously when AIG was threatened. Why should the health of the financial service industry be considered so important that we can rewrite the rules if it's threatened, but Americans' access to education is not considered as important?
Well, it's a moral issue. A corporation is not a person.
If you look at history, what you find is that a loan is just a promise. Promises made between equals can be renegotiated when circumstances change. That's just common sense, and it has always been the case. If you look at the ancient Middle East, the blanket cancellation of loans, periodic clean slates, was completely institutionalized. It became a custom, for example, for new kings to simply wipe the slates clean. Often they would leave commercial loans in place, but they'd wipe out all consumer loans. Of course, the biblical Jubilee institutionalized the same idea every 7 to 49 years.
Every 7 and 49 years. And what happened?
All loans would be considered null and void. All people who were debt peons would be released.
Debt peons?
Well, part of the problem was that they would not just repossess your lands and your flocks, but eventually members of your family. So that very large percentage of the population were effectively working in debt peonage. They were taken away by creditors as the equivalent of wage laborers, put to work as a shepherd in their shop, something as a domestic servant. In fact, there are many who say that the famous commandment, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's wife or ox, is not actually speaking of lusting in your heart. It's actually speaking of taking them away as debt peons.
So to you, it's obvious that not only is someone not reneging on a moral obligation by not paying back their loan, but in fact, it's historically grounded.
Yeah, because most people, do not consider a contract that you have to take to be the same as a contract that you freely enter into that you didn't have to take. Now, an educational contract, for example, if you want a job with health care in America, you have to have a college education. It's not like somebody just decided to go to college. This is not an option. If you want any sort of reasonable Social Security at this point, you have to have a college education, and therefore you have to take out a loan.
Unless you happen
to be rich.
Unless you get a scholarship.
Speaking as someone who was pretty much a top student throughout my life, the scholarships don't usually cover it all the way. It's almost unheard of. There are a few people, but it's very, very few.